So it's pretty much known throughout the lands that The Witcher 3 is considered the gold standard of modern AAA RPGs, akin to the likes of Skyrim, or in my opinion Oblivion, Fallout New Vegas, Baldur's Gate 3, Elden Ring, older Mass Effects, etc, etc. At least when specifically talking about AAA RPGs. With this in mind, I feel like it's worth reflecting on what makes The Witcher 3 great. Why was it well received? And is it as good as we remember it to be? Because sometimes the lack of any major competitors at the time of a game's release can ever so slightly cloud our judgment. So kicking things off, let's start with The Witcher 3's main strengths before suggesting what improvements should be made for the sequel. Interesting, well-written characters with multiple layers and secrets to their personalities were plentiful, and this was prevalent in side quest characters as well as those found in the main questline, something exceedingly rare in many AAA RPGs, especially modern ones. On top of this, most questlines had a variety of outcomes depending on your choices. Yes, your choices did actually matter in this game, with plot twists and endings that weren't actually predictable. It was almost as if these quests focused on developing the overall universe of the game world, whilst presenting us with interesting lore and characters, instead of serving as a, ooh, you need to be high leveled for this game stage, so farm these meaningless things with no real context, and I'll give you a purple item with a super gamery name. Oh, and because it's a video game, this weapon will have 99.92 DPS, with a 10% crit chance when you hit the fourth toe of humanoid enemies. Woohoo! Basically, what I'm saying is the focus was story first, reward second, not the other way around, and this gave The Witcher 3 its soul or personality, identity, whatever. That's not saying that you didn't get rewarded for completing quests, it just wasn't the primary focus, but more on the loot later. It's also worth mentioning that many of the quests ended in a bittersweet way, where it wasn't simply ending A is good, ending B is bad. Many a times the so-called better endings would still be depressing, so there's plenty of grey zone moments scattered throughout. This was also the same for many of the characters you meet, such as the Baron, initially an obvious evil villain, but as the story progresses and the layers unfold, your opinion may change. May. The Witcher 3 had a great world design as a whole, with multiple factions, distinct locations with unique characteristics, and environmental storytelling often coinciding with the use of your Witcher senses. Whether it be the rough and ready city of Novigrad, swarming with corruption and poverty, the vast mountainous ranges of Skellige, or the almost Disneyland-esque rural Spain vibe from Beauclair. Each region felt interesting to explore. Furthermore, rather than just doing the same old video game tick box method of only making each place visually different, The Witcher 3 went further, giving unique accents, mentalities, and political feelings to each area. For example, in Novigrad there was a clear divide between the rich and poor, with many NPCs being rather blunt and to the point on a lot of the problems, speaking out loud to one another in the streets and spitting everywhere. Whereas in Skellige, people felt more at peace with the world, mainly due to the fact that, there wasn't a significant war being waged in the land, which does kinda help. Beauclair, on the other hand, was very eccentric throughout, with plenty of snobbery and generally arrogant vibes, even though there was a massive juxtaposition between the vibrant visual art style when compared to the actual events taking place in the area itself. With the two main strengths out of the way with, I'll zip through these. So for the most part, the voice acting was fantastic, albeit Dandelion did feel slightly off. Personally, and this is with hindsight, I would have loved for the actor from the TV series, Joey Beatty, to have taken this role as well. His portrayal of Dandelion was just far more flamboyant and suiting of the character. It would have been amazing to hear him, especially alongside the video game version of Geralt. Also, as already mentioned, the variety of accents from the NPCs was much appreciated, including an honourable mention to the Redania guards. Just Gwent. Not really much more to say. It's probably one of the best MIDI games I've ever played in a video game, which also had really fun questlines connected to it. This is obviously something I would love to see return in Witcher 4, with more tournaments and crazy plots, potentially with even more shithousery. Depending on your location or whether or not you have entered combat, the soundtrack will differ, offering a variety of tones that are just phenomenal and always appropriate to the setting, with busier tracks being played during combat and in crowded taverns, and ambient tracks with slower tempos and drone notes being played as you traverse the Isles of Skellige. Personally, I'm a big fan of Stealthy Humans, or Banana Tiger as I like to call it, and of course the Fields of Ard Skellige. The latter a prime example of how the developers have connected the music to the general feel of each province and its inhabitants. If you haven't already, I would strongly recommend giving them a listen. Now it's time to balance the books, looking at where The Witcher 4 can learn from its predecessor's shortcomings, at least in my opinion. So without further ado, here is my wish list for The Witcher 4, starting with the combat. The Witcher 3's combat wasn't exactly horrible. In fact, I would even say at times it was actually kind of good, with somewhat satisfying swordplay, albeit janky, in conjunction with Witcher shouts that provided a much needed layer of depth as you encountered multiple different enemy types that had to be treated differently. These enemies were then added to your bestiary, which would track their weaknesses to specific oils, shouts, decoctions and potions, whilst providing a brief description on their lore. So yep, you guessed it, preparing said oils, decoctions and potions therefore became a pivotal part of the gameplay loop, with their impact being felt even more on bosses and higher difficulties, as the base game was extremely easy on the normal difficulty. For me, the bestiary was fantastic, and I will look forward to seeing it inevitably return in The Witcher 4. However, I would like to see more depth added to your specific combat moves, as aside from a few skills, the majority of buffs, excluding decoctions and potions, so just referring to the raw melee combat, came in the form of percentage increases, like on your swords and your armor generally, which is fine and necessary, but it would be nice to see this alongside more interesting combos. Not asking it to be like Tekken, but a few more moves would go a long way to making the combat feel considerably better, because essentially it was light attack, heavy attack, slightly funky finish attack, then Blood and Wine introduced this like a spinning sword attack, which was, I guess it was good for crowd control, but that was literally it. Also, it might just be me, but I hope the combat movement improves by feeling more responsive, as it felt slightly off in The Witcher 3, especially when engaged with multiple enemies at a time. This scenario heavily exposed the jankiness which felt extremely reminiscent of the old Assassin's Creed games, with an infuriating lock-on system that just didn't work half the time. Additionally, and this goes absolutely without saying, combat with ranged weapon types needs to seriously improve in The Witcher 4, as crossbows basically acted as primitive nerf guns, doing little to no damage and feeling very much like an afterthought. Finally, although not specifically connected to a problem with The Witcher 3, I would like to see a revamp in the way weapons and armor scale, kinda in the same grading system as that seen in Elden Ring. Now, understandably, playing as a Witcher rather than a self-made character from the ground up, it's expected that your character, Geralt, or Ciri in the case of The Witcher 4, should already be a master of their weapon, but I believe this system would provide an interesting range of specific build types, rather than just encouraging the same old tired meta builds. Now this is a very subjective point, but a lot of The Witcher 3's armor to me, Grandmaster crafted gear aside, just looked kinda bad, or at like peak okay. Obviously I understand due to law that I'm not going to travel around Novigrad in a mech suit, jetpacking from point A to B, and that the best looking armor sets in the game probably should be the strongest, but having more interesting options would be much appreciated. Furthermore, continuing to link these armor sets to engaging side quests as they've already done before would be fantastic and essential moving forward. Lore abiding, it would also be nice to see more unique looking weapons that visually separate themselves from others with a distinct styling rather than just silver sword with gold handle, steel sword with black handle, and a subtle curve. Perhaps a petty point, but I had to include it because I was underwhelmed by what The Witcher 3 had to offer in this department. As was the joke at the time, most quests in The Witcher 3 had an atrocious payout, especially considering the amount of money you would spend to simply prepare yourself for an upcoming fight. Obviously this was far more noticeable on the higher difficulties, but this in turn would encourage players to basically set up their own businesses, selling the same shitty swords and armor pieces over and over again, fast travelling from vendor to vendor as they never had enough money, 10 miles away from the area you want to be. But of course, yet again, it's a video game, so you are probably over encumbered after looting 2 sets of armor. But wait, there's 6 enemy corpses on the ground over there with said armor and weapons. I guess I best sell half then return again. Wait, what was that about that Siri person needing my help? You get the point. This was also a huge problem for me in the launch version of Cyberpunk, but it was almost as if CD Projekt Red was self-aware of the issue, adding selling machines, basically little ATMs, around every corner where you could sell weapon A times 15 several times as if you were playing Borderlands. Now, I'm not saying remove loot, we all love looting, and to someone like me who is a little OCD, this problem probably annoys me more than it should. But the oversaturation of meaningless shit that became meaningful because of the game's terrible economy significantly dampened the immersion, as I wanted to spend more time in the game world, playing the quests, not in my inventory. I don't always want the video game to remind me that I'm playing a video game, if that makes any sense. So for The Witcher 4, just tone down the amount of loot, or for my special case, just remove the concept of being over encumbered. I can't stand it in video games. Or have a camp chest system like in Baldur's Gate 3, even though it's not ideal. Personally, The Witcher 4 could have terrible combat, and I would still play it for many hours, as I, alongside many other fans of the series, am here for the characters, the world, universe, side quests, main quests, Gwent, etc, etc. So for me, they have to continue to maintain this extremely high standard set by The Witcher 3. Perhaps sharing more faction-based lore or cult lore would be a useful addition, alongside even more creative quests that utilise flashbacks to show past events, maybe allowing us to experience being a different character within these visions, something sort of explored in the Hearts of Stone DLC. Moreover, expand upon the layers of choices and consequences, adding more options for obscure endings, as well as including new minigames with potential links to the mythology of the game universe. Now this point is extremely petty, but I would like to see more named NPCs that aren't necessarily part of a major side or main questline, and so they act kinda like sources of lore. This point is very much inspired by the random bundle of NPCs you'll meet throughout the Elder Scrolls series that don't really add anything at all to a plot, but helps to flesh out the universe, even if it's just like one line that's kinda stupid and funny. There's something about having an actual named NPC instead of just villager that would give the game a lot more personality. I don't really know why, it just name them, My final request in this wish list is essentially, don't do a Cyberpunk. Do not take 2 years after the initial launch to make the game you intended to make. That means stable performance, no game-breaking bugs. Obviously there's going to be some, but there's a limit to this. Also, don't release the game with a half-assed system that was always going to be fixed later down the line. Fix it now. At the end of the day, a game has one launch, and a lot of respect was lost after the release of Cyberpunk. Remember, it's better to delay a game and treat your workers well, than to crunch your workforce to meet an arbitrary deadline and still serve up an undercooked mess. Obvious advice aside, if there's anything else you think I've missed from this list, please let me know down below. Thanks for your time, and I'll speak to you soon.